Hello friends, we're here today to review the very first episode of Drive to Survive and the very last episode of Drive to Survive. Except, I lied. We are just doing a comparison. First episode season 1, first episode season 7, and seeing how it goes. Because a lot has changed since the beginning of the show, like a lot. And we're here to look at it. And I did a little cutesy PowerPoint that I think everyone will love and no one will have any complaints about. And we're just gonna get it going. So we have the Then versus Now poster. I actually don't know if that was like the main image for like season 1, but that's kind of the one that I found. And this is definitely being the main image for season 7 that I think it's brilliant. I actually really love this shot of Max and seeing the McLaren and the Ferrari kind of fighting in the background. Genius. We need to see the way the teams change throughout the seasons because it's been 7 years. You know what I mean? It's been a while. Let's get a little closer for Mercedes. Mr. Toto Wolff, of course, is still the team principal. And we had, oh my god, Bottas' face so pixeled. We have, of course, Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas as teammates. Then for Red Bull, we have Christian Horner, Danny Rick being driver number 1, which it's been a while. It's been a hot minute since he's been in that kind of position. And Max Verstappen. I think back when this was filmed, 2018, this was like his 3rd year in Red Bull. Very fresh, very new. Then we have Ferrari. This man, I didn't know him, to be honest. His name is Maurizio Arrivadene. And back then, of course, we have Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen as the drivers. Back then, we had a team called Force India that you may or may not remember. And the team principal was Omar... I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it, actually. Omar. The drivers were little known Checo Perez and Esteban Ocon. McLaren had a completely different team principal, even though I feel like I don't remember a time when Zak Brown wasn't McLaren's team principal. And his name was Andreas Seidel. And the drivers were, of course, Fernando Alonso and Stoffel van Doorn. Oh my god. And we're gonna go woo all the way to the other side. We have Williams, back when the Williams family was still on board. Team principal was Claire Williams, daughter of the founder of Williams. And the drivers were Lance Stroll and Sergey. For Toro Rosso, that was the name of the team back then, which I actually think it's quite a good name in comparison with what we had in the 2024 season. Team principal for Toro Rosso was Franz Tost, and the drivers were Pierre Gasly and Brendan Hartley. Here we have Haas, look at him, cutie. Haas team principal, of course, Gunther Steiner. And the drivers at the time, which to me it's kind of like the drivers I associate with Haas. Another team that we had back then was Renault. This team principal to me is very iconic, Cyril Beep. And the drivers were Nico Hülkenberg and Carlos Sainz. Great team. And to end it all, we have Sauber, just Sauber. Team principal Fred Vasseur, I don't know. And the drivers were Marcus Ericsson and Charles Leclerc. Let's go back, let's see the way it looks. Nice, peaceful, we get the vibe. It was definitely a moment in time. A very different moment in time to the one we are in right now. Appreciate the difference. Beautiful. Let's do it again. If you notice, Toto, Lewis, Christian Horner, and K-Mag are basically the only people that remain in the same place. Like, tons of people are still there. They just moved around quite a lot. Mr. Toto Wolff, of course. Lewis Hamilton for the last time ever, and George Russell for Red Bull. Horner still there. By the end of the war, we're gonna have cockroaches, and Horner is still gonna be team principal at Red Bull. Mind you, no one's happy about that. Max still there, now he's driver number 1, and Checo Perez, who is not there anymore. But this is 2024 season, okay? Then we have Ferrari. Fred Vasseur moved all the way to Ferrari with his fave little boy, Charles Leclerc. And Carlos Sainz completing the lineup, obviously the team that used to be Force India. Team principal for Aston Martin now is Mike Crack. And the drivers, of course, Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. In McLaren, we went from Andreas to Andrea. Andrea Stella. And the drivers are, of course, Lando Norris and Pierre Gasly, who looks fabulous in this picture, mind you. Well, he kind of looks a little bit disgusted, but from afar, he looks fabulous. Going back to Williams, we had James Bowles as team principal, Alex Albon, who's been there for a hot minute, and Logan Sargent, who did not finish the season in his seat. Toro Rosso ended up being called Visa Cash App RB. Beautiful name. Absolutely not giving dystopian post-capitalist vibes. Team principal is Lauren Mikes, and the drivers used to be Danny Rick, who again did not finish the season, and Yuki Tsunoda. Haas had a change in command quite recently, and the new team principal name is Ayao Komatsu, and the drivers are another quite iconic Haas lineup, Nico Hülkenberg and K-Mag, who again is like the quintessential Haas driver, even though he's not there anymore. Love you. Another team that changed quite a lot, Renault became Alpine. Team principal is Oliver Oakes, and teammates and iconic enemies, Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon. And finally, we finish with Kick Sauber, seeing Mattia Binotto as team principal, and the drivers were Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Iconic season, if you ask me. We are gonna start by looking at 2018 core. How were things back then? Because they were quite different to what we have right now in F1. First things first, Lewis Hamilton was 4 times world champion back at the day. We all know that he will eventually go to become a 7-time world champion, iconic behavior. He was only kind of halfway through his dominance, but he had been undefeated for a while. And maybe because of that reason, back then, Mercedes was considered the main top team, Ferrari being the other main top team. Season 1 Drive to Survive, neither Ferrari or Mercedes are in it. No interviews, no access to the garage, none. They said that they didn't want any distractions, but a lot of people thought that they just don't want to share any secrets. They don't want to give the possibility of anything unsavory filtering into the press, and therefore, they closed their doors. However, who could have predicted that this was going to be a massively beneficial marketing tool? Of course, the Red Bulls themselves. They love Netflix. Something else that was quite different at the time is that I feel like these days we've kind of taken for granted the fact that there's a maximum amount of money that teams can put into the car, which kind of like level the playing field, but that was not the case on season 1 of Drive to Survive. No. That wouldn't happen until 2021, and this is 2018, so there's still, 3 years to go for that change to take place. And what happened exactly 3 years later, you may ask? It was the first time that Lewis Hamilton was defeated by Max Verstappen. Okay, after a little housekeeping, let's go straight into Season 1, Episode 1 breakdown of Drive to Survive. The name of the episode was All to Play For, and the vibes back then were definitely different. Back then, the show was mostly created as a way to attract new fans into the sport, as opposed to showing fans the behind the scenes of the drivers, which is the reason why a lot of F1 fans do not like Drive to Survive or never even got to watch it. It's 1,000% made for new fans. So one of the things Drive to Survive used to be very famous for, and to be honest is still very famous for, is saying the most obvious things. I include a little TikTok to illustrate my point.
If you start at the back, you're last. Formula One is nothing without cars. When a contract is unsigned, no one's signed it yet. Ferrari and Mercedes are 2 different teams. There's 1 seat in a car, 2 seats in a team. And if you're not in those seats, you're not in the car.
I know this seems extreme, but I would not be surprised at all if at least 1 or 2 of these were actually said in the documentary. It would not surprise me whatsoever. Anyway, as we have established, both Mercedes and Ferrari, that were the most well-known teams at the time, did not want to participate in this. Red Bull did want to participate in it. So Netflix has actually said that they needed to look at potential new faces to introduce to the people regarding the sport. Instead of Lewis Hamilton or Ferrari, they needed something new, they needed something fresh, and they needed something very televisable, like a big personality. They needed a main character. And who did they choose? Daniel Ricciardo, who was presented as Red Bull's best opportunity to beat Mercedes, who had been undefeated for a while. It's just really painful to watch because Danny is being presented as this future world champion, and we know that he ended up getting kicked out midway the season with no heads up from Red Bull's junior team. So things ended up going quite badly for him, mostly due to his own poor decision making, but still it is painful to watch. Anyway, what was the situation at Red Bull at the time? So Christian Horner is shown talking about how Red Bull won 4 consecutive world championships with Vettel, of course. However, once that golden era was done, they had nothing. Like, they literally were struggling to even win the race. And we see Horner being interviewed by Netflix in this first episode of the first season saying, we need to start winning races. Danny Rick is the way to go. We need to get moving. And I mean, the team did find themselves completely crushed by the way of Mercedes and Ferrari. Like, they were both the main teams, which is funny because none of them have won in a while. But it's also interesting to see that Danny was their breadwinner at the time. He was the person they envisioned would make them winners again. And the other half of the team was kind of like, this new guy, this new kid on the block that may or may not come handy at some point, Max Verstappen. This was going to be Max's third year in the team. And I mean, thus far, he did pretty well. I mean, comparing Ricciardo and Max for their first 2 seasons together, we have 3 wins each, 18 podiums Danny, 11 podiums Max, 1 pole Danny, 0 poles Max. However, Max did outqualify Danny 21-20, but in the end, putting it all together, Danny ended with 457 points and Max 377 points, so the difference was pretty big. However, if you flash forward to the end of this season, the end of the 2018 season, Max ended up 4th in the driver's standings, while Danny was 6th, and the difference in points was stark. Max made 249 points and Danny did 170. So this was the beginning of the end for Danny, sadly, but it was the beginning of a big change for Red Bull altogether. On the other hand, other than Red Bull, of course, you need more main characters, and the team they chose was Haas, the underdogs. I mean, Haas was the newest team at the time, and they were such a teeny tiny team, you know, like they literally mentioned they only had 212 people working for the entire company, and they even joke about, oh, Mercedes has more than that amount of people any given day on vacation. So they are a really small team with a really small budget, which at the time was a big deal. However, in this team, other than highlighting the drivers, they spend way more time highlighting Günther Steiner, because I mean, Günther is the superstar of Drive to Survive next to Danny. He just has a TV personality, easy as that. And I do love Günther and I miss him. I don't know if he was the best team principal for Haas, but I liked having him around. Other than Günther, the person that was kind of presented as the future of Haas in this first episode was K-Mag, a much younger, more optimistic, positive, bright version of the K-Mag we all know and love. In this first episode, actually, he's introduced like fearless Kevin. He talks about how he never thinks about dying, he never thinks about the consequence of crashing his car. We gotta say, we've been knowing. We know. That's the way it goes. And then the storyline for this specific race they're showing in the episode is that Magnussen actually qualified in 5th place, which was Haas's best ever result at that time, and probably ever since, to be very honest with you. Like, if we look at Haas's history, their first year on the grid, they only got 29 points, and they were 8th on the grid. The next year, they went up to 47, but they were still 8th on the grid. However, this season 2018, season 1 of Drive to Survive, they would go up to 5th team in the Constructors' Championship, which is insane, making all the way up to 93 points. So Kevin was right in being optimistic and being excited about this new season, because they would achieve what was absolutely unthinkable for Haas all the way until then, and what has been unthinkable ever since, because the next season they went all the way to 9th place with only 28 points. The 2020 season they only got 3 points, and things have not looked great ever since. Back in 2024 they did have the opportunity to be 5th again, but ended up losing it to Alpine and then ending in 6th place. So Kevin qualifying was a really big deal at the time. Anyway, what were the takeaways of the episode? Well, when it comes to Danny, his storyline is presenting him like, this is our guy, this is our opportunity, we're going for it. However, he does end up losing the race to Lewis in this episode, which to me, it's kind of a great symbol of Danny's overall career since Drive to Survive started to this day. He went from being the top dog at Red Bull, a team that still had so much potential and that would go to become world champions, however not with him, who ended up making bad decision after bad decision and being dropped altogether from F1. Really upsetting. And then the takeaway for Haas and Kevin was that despite the fact that he qualified 5th, due to Haas's mistakes on the pit lane, he ended up DNFing, and Grosjean, his teammate, did also end up DNFing, which is again a pretty accurate way to display Haas's ways all the way till now. Kevin does mention at the end of the episode that it is his dream to get to win races and become a champion someday. And he talks about how much faith he has in this team and how they are just getting started, and like knowing that he never ever had a chance to get even close to achieving his dreams and he ended up being dropped altogether breaks my heart. Now, before we go into season 7, we gotta do some housekeeping. Very briefly, Max is not on Drive to Survive anymore. Even though Red Bull loves Drive to Survive, Max does not love Drive to Survive, and he basically refused to be interviewed for season 3 and 4th, and I think season 6 he was barely on it, or maybe he wasn't in it at all, I don't remember. And this season he's also not in it, or at least not willingly, something we're gonna touch on very soon. Anyway, let's go to season 7, episode 1. Let's go. The name for this episode is Business as Usual, a quote by Horner. And the first thing that we'll notice, if you're someone that goes from season 1 to season 7, having seen nothing in the middle, is that this is straight up not the same show, because nothing's the same. Danny Rick has about 6 seconds on screen. Kevin Magnussen has one line, and it's only about how Lewis is moving to Ferrari, and Gunter's not in it. I mean, he's not in F1 at all right now, so it makes sense, but it's like, as a viewer, you would be very surprised. The only face you would recognize is, of course, Horner, even though he's painted in a very different light from this ambitious team principal he was in season 1, trying to move his team again to success, to Horner the Horn Dog. We're gonna get into that in excruciating detail later on again. The episode starts with Horner bragging, of course, about how Red Bull just broke all their records. Like, Max won every single race in 2023 except for one. That was won by Carlos Sainz. And they were on a roll. They won the Constructors, they won the Drivers' Championship, and it's the 3rd year on a row. They are displaying absolute dominance. However, things were about to change, little did they know. In terms of commentators, which I didn't really mention for season 1, we still have Will Buxton. He's been one of the main commentators throughout the entire show. However, the one thing that is interesting is now we have Claire Williams, who went from being Williams' principal to just being a commentator. Big demotion. First storyline of the episode is, of course, Lewis Hamilton moving to Ferrari and Carlos Sainz getting displaced. I mean, this was the first piece of the domino that made the 2024 season the chaos and beauty that ended up being. One of the first scenes is Carlos giving Charles a crochet chili to commemorate their post-teammates era, even though this was filmed before the 2024 season started. It's just really precious seeing how much Carlos appreciates Charles and how much he loved being teammates with him in Ferrari. But that's not the only reason why it's heartbreaking. Throughout the rest of the episode, they are definitely highlighting that Carlos Sainz is a top driver in top shape. He was the only guy other than Max to win a race in 2023. He went immediately on the podium in 2024. Then he went all the way to Appendix Gate, in which he could not participate in the second race because he was getting taken care of. However, he then went, as we all know, to win Australia. And that would not be his only win that season, as he will be on the podium in numerous occasions and then end up winning in Mexico. So letting Carlos go, it's not smart. However, if there was one person that could replace him, it would be Hamilton. And I think even Carlos himself said so. Completely unrelated, but had Mercedes agreed to interviews in the first season, the difference between Mercedes Bottas and Kick Sauber Bottas would blow your mind. You would definitely not recognize him had you not been following the show. But I mean, this is a glow up, in my opinion. Like, look at this man. He knows who he is. He knows he's hot. He's also someone that time has not been kind to. Other of the main points that get mentioned in this episode is that the grid in 2024 is the exact same as it was in 2023, either for the first time ever or for the first time in a very, very long time. However, many of the drivers did not have contracts extending past 2024, which meant that 2024 ended up being a full year of silly season, but it also meant that by the end of 2024, 6 of these drivers were completely out of Formula 1, including main character Danny Rick and main character Kevin Magnussen. It's just so upsetting. And of course, the episode kind of plays with where is Carlos going. There's this moment in which Carlos and Lewis are sitting together for an interview and Hamilton is asking him like, did Toto call you yet? And Carlos is like, no. I did here a little collage showing Carlos in a Red Bull, which I think looks really dapper. Carlos in a Mercedes, which I don't love. And Carlos in a Williams. Like, that is a really good picture. Obviously, that's a real picture, we know. He looks better in white than I expected. And I took the liberty to not add any edits of Carlos in an Alpine or Carlos in a Kickstopper because I am not manifesting that future for Carlos. However, the big bomb of this first episode, well, I guess that Hamilton thing it's a pretty big bomb, but this is an even bigger bomb that we all know and love to hate, is of course Horner the Horn Dog. In order to actually talk about it in a way that is respectful and in-depth enough how I feel this should be talked about, I'm going to abandon the PPT format and I'm just going to sit and talk to you guys because I do not appreciate the way Netflix covered this entire story and I really want to get in there to the details of what happened in ways that Netflix didn't or couldn't do. So strap on, we are moving to my computer camera. First things first, I did not like the way Drive to Survive handled the situation whatsoever. I understand that due to legal reasons, due to being afraid of being sued, they cannot really portray the situation maybe in the way they would have preferred. However, they were so vague about what actually happened. Actually, they didn't really go into details about what happened at all. And they gave Horner opportunity after opportunity to paint himself as the victim of this massive conspiracy. And it was just disgusting to watch, to be honest. I think they handled it in a very cowardly way, especially adding a little text in the end of the episode being like, hey, by the way, Horner was investigated by a third party. And I don't know exactly the sentence. It could have been something like he was cleared of any wrongdoing or he was found innocent of any wrongdoing. It seems to me that Netflix had absolutely no idea how to handle this and they were probably shaking in fear of being sued by either Christian Horner or Red Bull. Because of that, I understand it was a hard thing to cover, but at the same time they couldn't just not mention it because then people would be asking questions. Why was that not included on the show? Why are they on Horner's side? Why are they pretending like nothing ever happened? So they really couldn't win. There was no way that they could have done it justice. But the way it was handled, I did find it very, very disappointing. First things first, I did not appreciate that despite the fact that Max does not want to be on camera for the show, they snuck a camera on a half-open door recording a private conversation between Horner and Max, discussing the matter, discussing how much they can talk about in public. And they are kind of agreeing well, there's nothing to say, or well, there's nothing to talk about. And I think that paints Max as someone that was on Horner's corner, someone that was willing to cover for him, or someone that was standing up by him. However, that's very far from the case. If anything, due to this entire situation, it's very highly likely that Max will not continue with Red Bull as soon as that's possible. Max's dad has been asking for Horner to be removed from his position since the beginning of this situation. Multiple team members, including not only Adrian Newey, but Red Bull sporting director Jonathan Whitley, who had been a part of the Red Bull project since 2006, left the day after either the appeal happened or the day after the texts were leaked, one of the two. This situation had heavy repercussions on the team. Sneaking a camera on Max, who does not want to be part of this show, to make it seem like he supports Horner, it's gross. Something that I will give them is that on the show, they include a lot of the questions the press was asking Horner and Red Bull, including how can we trust this internal investigation when Horner has not even been asked to step down until he's proven innocent. Horner, of course, didn't answer. He just said well, I'm part of this investigation, I can't really say anything, which absolutely he could have made a comment about that. That was not about the case itself, but about the way that it was being handled. And he could 100% have said something if there was something good to say. People were going to be judgmental about it because it's not okay that they allowed someone that's being investigated for inappropriate behavior to continue to be in that position while he's being investigated by their own company. Obviously, they have no intention to give him the boot. At the time this journalist is asking these questions and Horner is kind of washing his hands and saying he can't say anything, they go ask Zach Brown, who is the principal of McLaren or the face of McLaren, and to me, he gave the perfect answer. He said, and I quote, "The allegations are extremely serious. Red Bull Corporation, it appears, has launched an investigation, and all we hope is that it will be handled in a very transparent way in which there's no doubt that it's being handled appropriately. because I don't believe that these are the type of headlines the Formula One wants or needs. He's not really supporting Horner or going against Horner or giving his personal opinion in any way, shape, or form. All he's saying is that he hopes the matter gets solved. And we see Horner very upset, calling Zach a prick. If you're upset that people want to know the truth about what happened, the truth does not paint you in a good light. Like, you could not convince me otherwise, allegedly. I also really like how cinematic and how dramatic it was when Horner was cleared and then the text messages leaked to every team principal and every member of the press. That was big television. Like, that was good. And honestly, whoever it was that leaked this and sent it not only to the press but to every team principal is messy. Whoever did that is so messy. And not only were texts leaked, but also pictures that were never seen before of Horner. I graduated from K-pop Twitter University, and I know that if a picture gets leaked and there's no original picture that could have been used to Photoshop, the pictures are real. Immediately when this happens, Horner jumps to someone's trying to ruin me, someone's trying to get me to not be concentrating on F1, which is what really matters. The timing of this is very interesting. When it's like, the timing is that you were dismissed and someone doesn't think that you should have been. That is what this is. Obviously, other team principals are going to be happy that this is taking place because it's going to affect your team, that it's a winning team. And the thing about cases like this is that the proof comes out and then the question is not whether there's proof or not. The question is this real? I have personally read every exchange in that chain. I will say those look real to me. Not in terms of Photoshop or whatever, but who would bother to make fake conversations that are so incredibly boring? May as well make it more saucy, you know? Like, the conversations are subtle and nuanced enough. Conversations are not black and white. Like, it's not him coming at her with like slurs or dick pics. They are not that overly explicit in nature. To me, the texts show a boss that keeps crossing lines again and again. And they also seem to show someone that maybe was more willing to cross those lines initially and are now rejecting the advances, and someone not taking no for an answer. That's what I see in those texts. So to me, the reason why Horner was dismissed, it's probably not because the texts are fake. It's probably more about, now there is proof. The proof looks legit. Now the next question is, was this consensual? And after reading the statements from Horner and the team of Red Bull, I think this is exactly the case. I think they probably consider this to be a consensual exchange between two adults and therefore none of their business. However, if it comes to a boss and an employee, that's inappropriate. That alone is enough for the company to take a stance on it. In my personal opinion, the way they could have made me believe that he was innocent is not keeping this so secretive and not being 1,000% clear of what's going on. The way to prove your innocence is put it on the table. This is what I'm being accused of, and these are the reasons why I'm innocent. Especially if the messages were fabricated, there are ways to prove if they are fabricated or not. Maybe not by Red Bull Corporation, but they could take it to legal. If this was so damaging to the Red Bull team, if this was so untrue, they could have easily sued for defamation and then take those texts as proof to get debunked by law professionals. But the reason why they didn't do that is probably that they know the texts are real, allegedly. And if you think about it, as far as I know, no one came out and said the texts are fabricated. Everything they said is the case was dismissed, he was found innocent of all wrongdoing, or I deny any wrongdoing. Those things do not equate that the texts are fake. And then the mere performance of Horner showing up hand in hand with his wife as this is happening, it's cruel. Submitting your wife to the intense scrutiny that will come from her showing up hand in hand with you and hugging you and giving you kisses. It's a performance and it's freaking embarrassing, to be honest. And then, once again, the wording is important. When a case is dismissed, it literally only means that it will not be further pursued. It doesn't mean the person is innocent or guilty. There are many reasons why a case may be dismissed. There may be the person that willingly or not necessarily 100% willingly decides to step down. There can be hush money. there can be not enough proof, there can be a massive variety of reasons for a case to be dismissed that don't include the person being innocent. And final point, the Independent contacted Red Bull Corporation for comment, and what they said, and I quote, was, "This is a private matter between Mr. Horner and another, and it would be inappropriate for Red Bull to comment on this." They are telling on themselves. They don't consider this a matter serious enough for the company to get involved. It's not a private situation between him and another person. When it comes to hierarchies and when it comes to inappropriate harassment and inappropriate relationships at work, the company should 1,000% do something about it. And the fact that they did not does not surprise me, but it's very freaking disappointing. Anyway, that's been a wild ride. In conclusion, DTS kinda suck. I'm really upset because it is a show that I did dearly love and it played a big part in reconnecting me with a sport that was such a big part of my childhood. If you liked the season or hated the season or have anything to say about anything, leave it in the comments. Like, subscribe, and consider this my official comeback because you will see me next week with a new video. Bye bye.